Tim. Today, I'm talking with Scott Campbell, the original lead designer, Fallout. We're going to talk about Fallout things and what he's been up to for the last
forever.
27 years.
Yeah, long time.
So you were one of the earliest team members on Fallout. You started on the team, I would think, right after the two Jasons.
That was when I officially started.
Correct.
But yeah, I mean, since even when we were just playing GURPS just for fun after hours, I was there. But even then, I have an actual trivia question for you, Tim. Do you remember the first time we met? Do you remember this? It is indelibly etched in my memory, so I just wanted.
Was I still a contractor? Or was I full time? Was I sitting in a hallway?
You had an office, but just so you know, this was before the Fitch building.
Susan?
Yes.
I guess I fail. I met you at the Susan building?
So check this out. So this is like 91 sometime, right? And Jeremy Barnes, you remember Jeremy Barnes? So I one of my high school best buddies, right? So he met with Chris Taylor, and the two of them were playing Warhammer 40K, and so they invited me to come by this place called Interplay and play Warhammer 40K. And so I show up with some miniatures and such, and Rusty Buchert's there. First time I ever met him, and he's in his leathers and and all that stuff, looking tough. And Scott Everts is there, right? And so we all play, Warhammer 40K, and I'm just in awe of the place at Susan, right? Because it had all those movie posters along the walls and everything else, and it was oh my gosh, an actual office where people make games. And so anyway, one of the posters was of the Bard's Tale, and I remember just with Rusty, I was just geeking out saying, oh my god, I love Bard's Tale so much. And he's like, oh, hold on, let me show you someone. And we walk down some hall, and he knocks on the door, and it was your office. And he opens up the door, and he's like, hey, Tim, this guy loves Bard's Tale. And I walk in, and I was like, you were working on Bard's Tale construction set.
Oh, my goodness.
And you were just the nicest guy ever. You're like, hey, come in, take a look at this thing. And I'm just like, ah. But the one thing I remember is, you were showing off that, oh, yeah, you can make your own stuff and, create your own, enemies and, your own, plots and party members and all that cool stuff. But in the screen of the maze of the dungeon and stuff, I remember even though it was only EGA at the time, it was the colors were kind of brown and hot pink and lime green. And I remember going, so what kind of area is this? And you're like, oh, it's a dungeon. And I'm like, and that was when you said, oh, by the way, I'm colorblind. And I was like, got it. Okay, now
all the pieces came into place. Yeah, I think Todd Camasta, he was the art director, and he had me make some changes. Apparently it was super ugly what I put together.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, Todd Camasta. When I first went into interview at Interplay, I was going to be an artist, and so I interviewed with Todd Camasta. And yeah, man, that dude, I mean, just total legend, this guy, right? But he was going off to lunch when I showed up, and he's like, all right. He sits me down in front of his Apple IIGS with e-paint or whatever, and says, I'll be gone for an hour or so, make something. And he leaves. And so I'm sitting there furiously clicking out pixels, going, okay, I gotta make something. And he comes back from lunch and kind of looks at what I did and was like, yeah, that's pretty good, but maybe something like this. And he sits down, and I swear to God, he just grabs the biggest brush possible and goes, click, 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 smaller brush, click, 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 smaller brush, click, click, click. And just within 5 minutes, it's this masterwork. And I'm just going, are you kidding me? And so anyway, I didn't get the job, needless to say. So I left, and I was like, eh. And so I run into Jeremy, and he's like, so did you get the job? And I'm like, no. And he's like, oh, well, you should totally talk to Rusty because he's head of QA. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah. So I went up and I talked to Rusty and pretty much got the job on the spot.
And didn't Jeremy Barnes end up head of QA?
Yes, he did. And when he left Interplay, he actually formed his own QA group, his own company, and did that for quite a while, actually. Yeah, good old Jeremy. But the another funny story is the reason why they were hiring at Interplay for playtest was because Fergus Urquhart was leaving QA to go back to college, and they needed someone to take his spot, and that's what I did. So
Fergus was my QA guy on Bard's Tale, and then he went back to UCSD, and then he came back. He was an assistant producer, then an associate producer, and then a producer, and then he was running the division that Fallout was going to go into. It was crazy. There was that company was so dynamic. That's a good word for it,
dude. I mean, as far as like turnover and stuff, I mean, seriously, like, I was in QA for I think like 4.5 months or something like that before Bill Dugan. You call it Bill Dugan. I'm sorry, Bill, if you're watching this. I never meant to say that name, but yeah. Hold on, I'm getting a call. Go away, call. Anyway, he needed he had a bunch of projects as a producer that he didn't really want to do, so he needed someone to kind of foist them off on, and so he just came into playtest and was like, "You come with me," and I became a assistant producer, like, overnight. So
such a formal process.
I know. It's funny. I still tell people that say to me, that they want to get into the game industry. What should they do? And I was like, well, QA or intern. Really, just be there and be in the development process. And I'm always like, what you have to do is you just have to, always be the person that is the solution and not the problem, right?
Well,
you're always like, hey, what can I do? Well, how can I help? And that everyone will remember you, right? And so when they think, hey, who can we get in this role? They're like, oh, that dude that was always there and always was like, hey, how can I help? Let's get him. So,
well, like Tom Decker he was the original producer for Fallout, but he had 22 other product SKUs. And so Alan Palos was just like, just write up the reports yourself. You'll be the producer now. And I was like,
yep.
But I'm making the engine and working on the design. And I've got all these, and I don't even have an assistant producer. He goes, you don't need one.
Yep.
You'll be fine.
You'll cover it. It's fine.
Yeah, you started, well, you were at the evening pizza meetings, right?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Because you weren't allowed to technically work with me.
That was the weirdest thing too. I mean, because like even though I was like, I felt like I was a part of Fallout from like the start, it still, I wasn't officially on for like quite a while.
Nobody was. I was actually told I wasn't allowed to have anybody.
Yeah, weirdest thing. But yeah, man.
I got in trouble after the first pizza meeting. Sort of. Somebody said, hey, I thought you weren't supposed to be pulling people off other projects. I'm like, it was after 6. I bought the pizza myself. Nobody had to be there. They could have gone home. And so Alan was like, all right. I'm like, I'm going to do it again. I checked my notes. I remember us doing it twice. This is why, by the way, I'm so glad I kept so many notes. We did it at least 4 times and maybe 5. It's a little unclear. I think on the I think we had 5, but I kept writing after the 4th notes because it went. The notes of the 4th meeting are really long and they get weird in the middle. So I think we restarted. Those were insane ideas we had too. Because I saw your write-up. Was it at No Mutants Allowed?
No Mutants Allowed. Yep.
And you wrote that crazy dinosaur time travel monstrosity.
Dude, that's exactly what I remember. So the crazy thing is I remember you guys. I was not at that particular meeting, the one I missed, but I seem to recall you guys said that you were at the Harp of all places, and you were, and just like the ideas were just flowing, and but all of this came from this one thing I actually did kind of want to touch on for the Fallout stuff was, specifically for GURPS, right? Like, how do you make a game that can encapsulate everything that is GURPS, right? With a generic system that can be any genre, right? So how do you make a game for that, right? The idea of like, having the time travel, starting off with like the Lovecraftian horror and going to the dinosaur age and then the cyberpunk with, dinosaur.
There's detective noir in there. It was just, I think it was Q, the producer, Michael Quarles. I think Q came to me and said, what are you thinking? You're insane. just because GURPS can handle anything doesn't mean you have to make it have everything. He said, pull it back. And I was like, we don't wanna. And he was like, this is not gonna get approved. So we went back to the drawing board. There was more pizza. I remember we talked aliens for a while.
It was, but okay, so I know we're jumping ahead. Though I remember seeing one of your videos about all the times that Fallout was almost canceled, right? And I remember there was this one other time that you didn't quite mention, and
I may have forgotten if I didn't write it down.
So it
doesn't work very well.
It wasn't that Fallout would have necessarily been canceled, but it was the what we were going for that eventually became Fallout could have completely changed. So let me take you back for a second, right? So at this time, what we were just talking about with how do you make a GURPS game, right? So someone, and I want to say it was Chris Taylor, but I honestly don't remember, said, hey, GURPS, Steve Jackson Games, is coming out with a GURPS survival book, right? And it was all about post-apocalypse stuff and radioactive damage and blah blah blah, right? And so we were like, oh my gosh, Interplay made Wasteland, and we're like, wouldn't that be the most awesome thing to make a GURPS Wasteland? We're like, holy shit, that's the most awesome thing ever. So immediately we were just like, oh my gosh, we can get the Guardian Citadel in there. We can get all the the
Rangers.
desert, Rangers and all the good stuff, right? And so I was going crazy with that, thinking of all sorts of ideas. But this was just before Christmas break of '94. And I remember we were all sitting in a room and we were so jazzed about this idea. We're making GURPS Wasteland. Hell yeah, right? The spiritual successor to Wasteland, but with the GURPS thing, big RPG. Brr. And so Dick Lehrberg knocks on the door and says, oh, hey, everyone, Merry Christmas. I'm taking off. Have a good holiday and stuff like that. And he turns to leave and does the total Columbo thing. One more thing, kind of, right? And he's like, oh, by the way, I just got off the phone with EA and they still own the rights to Wasteland, so you can't do that. Have a good Christmas. And then he left. And I remember all of us were just like, are you kidding me? So we had all the plans all set and everything was going great. And then it was just like, you can't do it. And so we were like, God damn it. And I remember, we were like, well, I guess we have to go back to the drawing board. And literally an hour or two later, we all left for our Christmas break. And I remember thinking over that entire Christmas break, God damn it, what are we going to do? I mean, sure, we had the idea of the aliens taking over the world and, all sorts of neat ideas, but there's just nothing really screamed like this has to be made. And then at the end of the day, I remember thinking, how much the idea, post-apocalyptic, GURPS just called to me, right? And I was like, you know what? Screw EA. And so I remember coming back with such a fire in my gut. And the first meeting we had, I basically said, you know what? Screw EA. We're doing it, but we're going to make our own thing, right? And that was, at least in my mind, right, that was kind of even before it was called Fallout or anything else, even before, when we were still working on GURPS, right? That was the thing. It's we're going to do our own post-apocalyptic thing.
Well, that was, the executable was called GURPS EXE, and I think it was the one with the grass and the trees and the little knight walking around. And poor Jason Anderson was like, what art do you want? And I'm like, I don't know. Go make me a knight. By the way, I found out years later, and it's a video story I'm going to do later because it's got a lot of background. I found out years later, EA never, ever intended to have Interplay get the license.
What? Really?
Yep. From very high up in the chain. So, and I was like, I found out that years later, but I remember thinking, sometimes Leonard and I talk about all the bullets we dodged. If we had gotten Wasteland, we never would have made this.
It's true.
And you know what? True. This is pretty good.
Yeah.
Yes. Here's the thing that blew me away. And I remember, this is why I'm so glad I kept notes. I'm going to embarrass you too.
Oh, all right. Bring it on.
I have notes from '95 that already have, I think early in '95, Junktown, the Hub, Necropolis, all the places people love.
Shady Sands, the Glow, you name it. Yeah,
you'd already done all that. It was already done. I mean, they were spec. I wouldn't say they were fully spec'd out, but there were already descriptions of like, here's what's going to be there. Here's some ideas of how quests are going to go through there. Here's some main characters that are there. The whole Killian versus Gizmo thing, and I'm just like, this is just. I was like, if you had asked me when we designed that stuff, I wouldn't have said, "Oh yeah, we had that by early '95." I would have said we were still thrashing around like a bunch of 20-somethings that didn't know what we wanted to do. But we were actually kind of on the ball back then.
Yes, indeed we were. I mean, it's honestly, like out of all these years I've been a designer and stuff. I mean, Fallout was really my first like actual like real design job where it's just like I got like all the kid gloves came off and it was just like do whatever you want, and I only had that a couple of more times in my career. I was thankfully lucky enough to get that a few more times, but Fallout was the first. And I think, my entire design philosophy was kind of created by those early days of Fallout where, in my mind, it's all about designing up front, right? Figuring out what it is that you're going to be making before you start investing tons of money into art and engineering and everything else. So
I tell people, you make a setting, you make a story, you make some mechanics.
Yep. Figure out find the fun before you do anything else, right? What is it that you're trying to tell? What emotions are you trying to elicit from the player? Why are they going to want to pick this up, right? And then once you have that core that can be interesting and entertaining, then you can build off of that, right? But like,
it is interesting that we had very little supervision. No one was watching us. I wasn't reporting. I would just say we did some things this week, but nobody was like, Have you made game pillars yet? Have you decided on an art style?
What's the X statement of your game? Yeah.
Yes. What are your main thematic expressions? And we're just like, hey, I thought this was fun. Let's do this. But here's where my notes get a little vague. I remember us talking about setting.
Mm-hmm.
When did we actually come up with that story?
You mean the story of the actual like vault?
The vault, the water chip breaks, you go out.
I will tell you, because I definitely remember this. So right after our Christmas break that I just mentioned, right? You had told me in your office that you had this dream, right? And the dream had to do with this like massive, underground bunker, right? And you, I mean, I'm going to attribute almost everything to you because literally this was a thing that made me go, "Are you kidding me? This is the coolest idea ever." That you had a bunch of people surviving in this shelter, right? When all of the bombs fell and all the horrible stuff, and they have no idea of what is outside. And I'm just like, oh my God, that is the coolest idea for a story ever. And so then I literally took it and ran, right? And so the water chip idea, I don't even think that's a great idea, but it was just like, how do we get them out of the vault? Why would they ever want to leave if all they're told from literally generations is, oh, there's just horrible things out there? Why would they want to go? So I'm like, well, something has to break. And if something breaks, they have to find something. They won't be able to build it. So they have to find something. So where would this thing be? Well, in another vault. So they'll basically have to go and find it from another one. Okay, cool. And that was like the emphasis, right?
I must have eaten so much ham over Christmas. But I think JT remembers coming up with that it was a water purification chip. I talked to him. It's weird. I mean, I wish I had written all this down. Yeah. My notes go from us discussing setting and genre to us making vaults and all those areas I mentioned, Junktown and the Hub, Necropolis. I'm like, when did that happen? And I guess right after Christmas, I guess early 95.
Yep. I mean, honestly, I went a little crazy. I mean, I made a huge document of just nothing but just like all of my just total brain dump of stuff. And Brian Fryermuth helped me out considerably on a lot of this stuff. And we had a ton of ideas. And honestly, I'd say, probably about a third of those ideas that we wrote up didn't even make it into the final game.
You guys were the word now would be passionate.
Yes.
Back then, you were a little crazy. I still remember your original sprite design. I know I told you about this. The one that had.
Oh, yes.
You wanted us to build 2D sprites from pieces of torso, arms, legs, head. So no matter what armor you had or what weapon, it would build it up in a sort of quasi Z buffered sprite.
Yes.
So remember Leonard's reaction?
Oh my God, yes. And you know what? I've told this to other artists before, and they all told me, no, there's no way in hell, no, I'd never want to do anything like that, because it's like the idea of like creating, artistically creating a character. That's one thing, but saying, all right, you're gonna make a head, right, and that head is gonna be interchangeable on all these different bodies, and it's like, no.
And every pose with any weapon.
Yep.
And I remember even thinking, well, how are the arms going to work? Because you hold a gun like this, but you hold a spear like this, and you're like, we'll figure it out. And I remember until then, I had never seen that look on Leonard's face on anyone else but Rusty. Rusty Buchert had a stress face he would get where there'd be a vein here, and he'd start to turn red, and he'd get flustered and go, ah. Leonard had a Buchert face that day. I believe he remembers that too as just a, like, I cannot do this. I cannot do this. It cannot be done. You're asking the impossible. And I was trying to figure out, is it impossible or just hard? Because we're going to do some hard stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I had made I had made like a little demo of that, like running. I had like a little 3D character I made in 3D Studio. Yeah, before it was called 3D Studio Max. I think it was just literally like 3D Studio version 4 or something like that. And
3D Studio Min.
Yeah, exactly. And I was able to show like, okay, cool, look, here's kind of like how it goes, and here's the order in which we draw things. But it was ridiculously complicated. And then because of the anti-aliasing and such at the time, right, since we really didn't have it, and to try to compute that alpha channel was just ridiculously hard. It was so hard to do with like sprites and overlapping stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, I could totally see where he was coming from, and I think what he eventually settled on was absolutely the right thing for the game, even though we had to cut out a lot of things I wanted to do. Best decision.
And that was a good example, though, of you did more than just design. You put art together. You made that GURPS vehicle editor just because I said I'm not going to do it. I did the character editor. I'm done. Yep. I need to work on code for a game now. And you were like, I'm going to put all the vehicle rules in GURPS vehicle. Vehicle book.
That was a dumb idea.
But that was an immense editor.
That was the most amount of time I have ever put on any sort of interface, because I thought, oh, it's just going to be easy. I put in some of these charts and a couple little rules and a couple little links. That'll be easy. No. The sheer amount of interface of like generating all the lists and being able to add the things, all the buttons and all the things, and making sure that all the database works, and it was so much work. But I got really, really familiar with your windowing system. What is it? It was
GNOW.
GNOW. That's right. Because
GNOW was in Fallout. GNOW was in Starfleet Academy and Max and Sim Earth and SimCity 2000. And the Jeremy Barnes, when he found out that all of the files for the GURPS character editor were external, that we just read them out of text files. So like I had done the basic set, and there were spells and skills and advantages and disadvantages. He's like, wait, I can just do whatever I want. And he and like some people in QA took those books Steve Jackson gave us, and they did like magic and horror and cliffhanger, just all of them. And I still have a lot of these files of just GURPS, some genre or some world book. They went insane.
Yes, they did in fact go insane.
But that was a weird time, and I try to explain to people now. We were this weird, passionate, boundaryless. Like I used to tell people, I'd go to Interplay at 2 a.m. Like I'd be driving back from somewhere, like LA or something, and I go, I'll swing by Interplay because there's only a few blocks from where I lived. I'd see a light on. I'd see somebody there. There was somebody who was in their office. Sometimes I went in and I'm like, I just want to know who's here. It was weird, and it was often one of you guys. You or Jeremy or Chris Taylor or Scotty or just someone just doing something. Sometimes you guys were just in the conference room because your game went on too long of whatever you were playing that night.
Yep.
And no one wanted to forfeit. You all wanted to be the winner. So it was like 2 a.m. You're like, we'll be over in another 2 rounds, 3 rounds, I'm sure. And I'm like, yeah, you guys, I'll see you here in the morning.
Good times. Good times.
It was
it was a family is what it was, right? And
Yeah.
it was like the best kind of family because we were all in love with what we were doing, right? We were all passionate about, not just the work, but like what it meant and what it represented.
We were excited about it.
Yeah, and like, I mean, speaking at least for myself, it's like I had spent literally all of my life in love with video games, and to actually be at a place where not only do I get to do that 24 hours a day, but I get to hang out with other people that are just as interested in it as I am. I mean, that was just magic to me.
I've talked with so many people about like what made Fallout magical, and also how we avoided like multiple cancellations and just like the pizza meetings that I had to get people after hours and all this. But the one thing that I think we haven't never Leonard and I, we talk about this a lot, and we never really thought of until I said I think it was, and we got lucky because we all did this. Somebody could have an idea and we could talk it through rather than just go, that's dumb. Nobody ever went, that's dumb. They went, okay, so you want to build up sprites from 512 various pieces. Let's talk about what that would mean. How many pieces, how many would we need, and how would we handle male and female characters? And are we going to have different races, and are we going to have different heights, and will there be fat people and skinny people, and how many weapons are we going to have, and how many armor? And we start doing the math. We, instead of just going, no. And we did that for everything. We did that for like, oh, I want to make a zone. I want to make a map for, this kind of area. I want these kind of people. They're trying to farm. They're just trying to survive. But these people made, hold up in a junkyard. But these people have a big sprawling area, and they even have water that they ship around to all the other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, we talked about those things and then said, okay, let's do it. I haven't encountered that a lot.
I mean, it's funny because I don't know how much of that is just, ignorance on our behalf of how hard everything really is, or, that we were just so passionate about it that we decided, we'll figure out a way to make it work. Right.
Yeah.
But, at the end of the day, though, I mean, all of us, we just wanted to make something that was awesome. And, almost more importantly, something that we want to play. Right. And I think that was our goal.
That was our rule. We liked making each other laugh. We liked each other going, oh, that's going to be my new favorite feature. We all wanted to be the person that week, because I found notes and I had to correct Leonard. Leonard likes to say that Jason Anderson had the idea for companions. And according to my notes, Scott Campbell had the original idea for companions, and we talked it out and we realized we couldn't do it because that was a lot of extra code and art and all this other stuff. But also, we were trying to make a game that was reactive to the player. And if you had a group, like if you tried to make a group that was fully controlled by the player, like Ultima's lets you do, we were like, well, who's it going to react to? We want the player to make a decision, the game to react to it, and the player has to live with the consequences. So we went, okay, it's just going to be a player. But it's funny because I told him when I found the notes, I'm like, no, Scott Campbell originally proposed that, and we talked him out of it. So then later when Jason talked a scripter into putting it in, and then we had to suddenly try to make code and interfaces for it. I was like,
well, so two things. The first thing is my original design. I mean, I only have like some scattered notes and such, but I was going a little insane on the things I was originally hoping.
A little?
Fallout. So beyond just the sprites and stuff, it's like I was so into like the Ultima games and like Ultima 4 and such like that. I mean, I wanted to have every character in the game to be on their own schedule and like scheduling system and such, and have the player be able to like go up to them and interact with them and say like, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I am in the process of moving from, my home to my shop, or, whatever they're going to be doing. Right. And you could actually interject your own schedule and say, hey, can you meet me over here at this time? And then they would change their schedule at that time to go and meet you. And like, you could make what I wanted to do, right? I wanted to be able to make any single person a companion or a love interest or, a friend or, whatever you could be.
Just part of a quest.
Yeah. I mean, so many interesting ideas, right? It's like I wanted the game to start inside of the vault, where you would actually take time to gather resources and potentially companions and friends that you would take out with you, and stuff like that, right? But
Yeah.
again, at the end of the day, I think what Fallout shipped with and everything else was perfect for what it was, right? Because when again, just left to my own devices, I probably would have gone a little bit deeper into like kind of like experimental technology stuff that we probably shouldn't have really been trying. But
we never really had. I was supposed to be the one who said no. Leonard said I was supposed to be the adult in the room, and sometimes I was. Closer to the end, I was. But I was also really excited about some of these ideas you had, and I was like, let's try them. I still remember, because I was a big one on I want moral stuff. I want moral dilemmas.
Yep.
And I love the Necropolis dilemma of you can just walk in and take their chip.
Yep.
But then they all die, and you get that horrible slide. Or you can try to fix. They had a jury-rigged purification system that they could use, but it was broken. You could try to fix that, but you didn't have to. And I just love that. A lot of people, especially the first time they played it, were like, I've got the chip. I'm not hanging around to do more work. I know what I have to do. And you take the chip back, and they expected the game to end there, and it doesn't. Because they're like, oh, now you have to go get mutants. And then they forget all about Necropolis, and then that slide comes up at the end. We're like, they all died.
Oh,
I remember someone in QA got upset. He came to my office, and he was upset. And he was like, you made me feel bad. And I'm like, well, go back and play again. That's the whole point. Go back and be a good person. He's like, I will. He was almost like, I'm going to show you. And I'm like, okay, but that's what we want you to do. That's the plan.
That totally reminds me of a story. Like the idea that, from the beginning, we wanted the player to basically have repercussions for their actions, right? That they can do anything, but whatever it is that they do, for good or bad, there's going to be results, right? And like when we were creating the list of animations for characters and things like this, we had here are the different body types, right? And here are the different action and reactions and things like that. And one of them, we're talking about the heap of gore technology, TM, right? Right? People exploding like a blood sausage and all that other good stuff, right? I remember having these lists for like, okay, male human, female human, rad scorpion, blah, blah, blah. And I had children, and they had all the locomotion and all of the death bits. And I remember, Leonard coming up to me and going, Scott, I see you have here children being horribly maimed and exploded into pieces. You sure you want to do that? And I remember going, he's right. We're going to get shit for this. But I was just like, you know what? Our rule is repercussions for your actions. So yes, you should be able to do anything. But, like the child killer, perk that you get, or reputation that then, screws you through the entire game because you're a horrible person. Yeah, that's exactly right.
I remember, because I had to code a lot of the stuff, we had enumerations for all those animation states, and there was pile of goo, there was pile of ashes, there was explode, there was one where part of the body just blew off and you could see ribs.
Yeah.
I think it was just, what was that called? That one had its own animation because they do a little dance. Yeah, and then because the overseer at the end, I think it was Tremel Isaac T-Ray. He made a special animation for the death of that guy. That was so big, it exploded everywhere. A tooth came out. It was like one white pixel. That's all it was, but everybody saw that with, oh God, his tooth. And then he starts crawling for the door. And I remember just thinking, have we gone too far? And then I said, no, we didn't. We didn't go too far. Because that won't happen unless you, the player, make it happen.
Exactly. And it's because you want that at that moment, right? And then when it happens, you feel satisfied. Kind of dirty, but still satisfied.
Well, that's the one where someone came up to me and said, I can't believe this game lets me shoot children. I'm like, the game does not let you shoot children. You shot a child.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, it shouldn't let me do that. And I'm like, but the consequences are severe. I mean, that child killer reputation, I think we spawned, it like moved to the top of the random encounter list. It would spawn bounty hunters that would just yell how horrible you were and then
And the
start attacking.
shopkeepers wouldn't want anything to do with you, and
Yeah. And the ones that did would charge you an arm and a nose, and the whole time they'd be saying you're an awful person. So there was no way you could have done that and not notice that the game was telling you, don't do this. I can't believe you did this. I'm gonna remember you did this.
That's just too funny. Oh my gosh. Good times. Good times.
I want to talk about the elephant in the room.
All right.
Because the last note I have that has your name in it is in September of 95.
Yeah.
And I remember you were leaving, and I remember you were explaining you were leaving, and I never understood it. And I will tell you now, and this is going to embarrass you, Leonard and I have repeatedly talked about all the trials and tribulations Fallout had, but we both agreed that when you left, we thought this thing might be over.
Oh, man.
You were important. Well, you know you're in the manual. We put a few names in as original Fallout design by.
Yeah.
Because we were afraid you wouldn't get any credit, because the way Interplay worked, if you left, you were out of the credits. And we're like, not on this project. We had full control of the manual, which probably was bad in itself because it ended up being really long and spiral bound and way more pictures than it was. Really expensive manual.
It was a fantastic manual. It was one of those manuals you put on your shelf. Yeah.
I have it right there. It is on my shelf. And yeah, when you open it up, I was so happy your name was still in it because you had done so much stuff. But I kind of want you to. I'm really big on now. I want people to tell their own stories. So you now tell stories for posterity, for recording, for everything.
There you go.
Why you left Fallout.
Okay, so this requires a bit of storytelling. So yes, settle back, grab your cocoa. Yeah, here it comes. Okay, so let me like kind of get from the beginning, right? So I'm in QA at this time, and I'm handed this game called Rags to Riches, and so I'm doing some testing on it, and I find that some of the interface is a little bit like kind of hard to get to because there's like a bunch of things I have to kind of click around and stuff. And so I was like, I wonder if you could consolidate some of these into just like one screen and blah blah blah. So I drew some stuff up, and I was told that you were the guy basically doing all the coding and everything for it. So I walked over to your desk, and I'm like, hey, so I had this idea, and I slid you the piece of paper, and you looked at it, and you were just like, oh my God. And you were just like, this is amazing. And I remember you called me Interface God. And I was
just really good. Do you still have them?
I wish I did, man. I wish I had anything from Interplay. I really don't. It's been so long, dude. So anyway, after that, it's like, still playing, after hours, all the, my God, you're playing everything, D&D, Shadowrun, GURPS and things like that. But when we were playing one time and we were talking about, wouldn't it be cool if we could get the GURPS license? And we kind of joked like, yeah, that's not going to be possible. And they're like, well, wait a minute, how hard would this actually be, right? It's like, hey, maybe we should make some inquiries and stuff. And I mean, I was not privy to how it happened until like I heard, oh my God, I think we could actually get this thing. And it was like, what? That's insanity. But I remember we were playing different types of GURPS games, trying to familiarize ourselves with the system, but like also trying to think of like, well, what could this game be, right? And I remember you had this is so great, this one night stand kind of Conan game. I'm trying to remember if you remember that, the one where the entire party pretty much got wiped. That was
your party did.
Yes,
I ran 3 parties through, and it was all different. It was you went to some wizard tower, and you were in the dungeons underneath.
Yes.
I remember that. Yes,
that was great. But who
was in your group?
I remember. My God, it was myself, my soon-to-be wife at the time, Melissa, and it was. Oh my gosh, come on, Scott. It was Jason Taylor. I'm trying to remember who else. There was a fourth, and I remember the fourth played this, big tough fighter with an intelligence of 3 or whatnot. He was like, wasn't as smart as like a chimpanzee, and I forget what we called him. It was like Thrud or whatnot. And Oh my God, the whole thing, it's all coming back to me. But that was great. But we saw what the final goal was, but we didn't quite understand that that was the final goal. And so we're like, that looks dangerous. And so we closed the door and went another way you weren't supposed to. And it was like a vault of darkness, but there was some horrible eldritch creature in there.
Tentacle thing, yeah.
Yes, and of course, my character got grabbed and was being dragged away into the abyss. And since I was a spellcaster, and in GURPS, you could channel all sorts of energy and then intentionally fail. And if you critically fail, you could cause this big spectacular result. And so I was like, I'm going to blow this thing up. So I channeled all this energy and then critically failed. And all I did was cause a little light to go poof, which was enough to make the rest of the party see the horrible eldritch thing and all go crazy and run away. Yeah, good times. Anyway.
Yeah, one group did survive that dungeon, I will tell you now. One of the three survived.
I remember you telling us this, and I was just like, well. So one of the games that I was running GURPS-wise was based on Roger Zelazny's. It was called Roadmarks. I don't know if you remember it or not, but it was
I've read that.
Crazy awesome book. But it's this idea of like
multi-dimensional road.
Yeah, but it was like time travel. The farther you go down one way, it goes to like the beginnings of like all history. But at the end, it's like kind of like the end of all history, and all of the people traveling back and forth between it, from super high tech to like cavemen to alternate histories to all sorts of other stuff. I was like, what a cool idea for like a video game, and especially using something like GURPS. And so I ran a couple of these games, but then I found, in my opinion, GURPS' fatal flaw, which was how they handled tech levels, right? So like you could have a 100-point character that could barely swing a sword, or you could have a 100-point character with a gun that could pretty much take over the world, right? And it's just like, it's like you have a high-tech laser gun or, a stone, and that is everything, right? So, and they never point balance those very well. So it's like, okay, because we had a couple of characters that were like modern characters in that scenario, time traveling scenario, but then one character in like power armor with a gun, and nothing could touch him, and and everything was like completely dangerous to the other characters. And anyway, I digress. So playing GURPS in the evening, and thinking about like what are the crazy things that kind of we could do, and that rolled into like, okay, we get the GURPS license, and then like what will we be making, right? And then GURPS Survival became GURPS Wasteland, and then eventually when Wasteland was taken, it was like, hell with that, we're just going to make GURPS survival whatever, right? We're GURPS post-apocalyptic game, right? And all of the writing and stuff that went into that. Well, at the time, I was not officially on Fallout. I was working as Bill Dugan's assistant producer, making typing games, and Sim Earth was the big project that I was given. Sim Earth, the CD-ROM version, and
Mark Harrison. Yes,
that was with Mark Harrison. God, I love that guy, Mark Harrison. He gave me my first book of C++, this giant Borland C++ book, and because up to that point, I knew like BASIC, I knew Pascal, I knew a couple other things, but not C++, and so that was the book that I taught myself. Anyway, so the in working on Simurth, and this was a project that I was pretty much like, it was another producer had it. That producer left the company, and so I was literally given this project that no one knew about, that had, I think, a budget of something like $200,000 or something like that, and 150 of it was already spent, and I had no idea on what, right? And so they're like, okay, and here's the deadline, and make it. And so I had all these crazy ass ideas of things I wanted to do. I thought the coolest part of Sim Earth was when you create your planet, certain species can actually become sapient and develop their own civilizations and do all sorts of cool stuff. And I was like, oh, that's so dope. I want to have an insight into what that actually looks like, with like, if like my little amphibians, become, Stone Age amphibians, I'm like, what does that look like? So Corey Comstock, I'm not sure if you remember him or not.
I remember the name.
Oh yeah, so he was a 3D artist working under Rob Nessler at the time, and he basically we were talking. I don't even remember the genesis of it exactly, but he was like, "Hey, I'd love to give that a try. Maybe make like a little movie about that or something." And so I was like, "All right, let's do it." So he comes back in like just a couple of days, and he has this frog, this amazing looking frog. I mean, I made a sketch of what I wanted these characters to look like, but he realized it all in 3D and made this movie, and his animation skills were off the chart. And remember, this was at the time that like Jurassic Park had just come out. So like 3D stuff for games and all that wasn't even really a thing.
Also, rendering a frame took minutes.
Exactly, right? And so, but he comes with his like entire movie of these frogs doing these crazy animated things, and I was just like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And I'm like, all right, we're gonna have movies for not just frogs for every period of civilization, Stone Age, Bronze Age, all the way up to like the Information Age, Atomic Age, and beyond. But I want it for all the other species as well, reptiles, dinosaurs, avians, blah, 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 blah. So we started doing this. And we, at the end of the day, I think made like 30 of these movies. And some of them were just absolutely amazing. When Steven Spielberg came by Interplay, because what we didn't know at the time was that he was actually scouting for this little company called DreamWorks that he was creating. So he came by, and Brian Fargo specifically wanted to show him Corey Comstock's frog animations, and apparently Steven Spielberg loved them, thought they were amazing. And sadly, what ended up happening was Mr. Comstock left Interplay because he was hired by DreamWorks to work on this little movie that would later become Shrek. So Corey did all of the actual initial designs, character animations and stuff, I suppose, for Shrek, back when it was Chris Farley doing Shrek.
Can I just interject and say Fargo brought Spielberg by my office because he wanted to see a programmer. And I'm sitting at my desk, and I'm just like, type. And Spielberg head, I mean, it was Steven Spielberg. He just looks, and I look up, and I think it's Steven Spielberg, but I just went, hello. And he goes, what are you doing? And I said, coding. And he went, and he kind of looked around the office, and he looked, I had a bookcase full of like, computational geometry and C and just, boring. And he went, huh. And he left. I didn't get a job at DreamWorks because programming looks boring.
Yep.
Programmers look boring.
Oh my God, that is.
And totally Mark Harrison wasn't even in the room, and he came in afterwards, and I went, "Hey, while you were out, Steven Spielberg came by," and he goes, "No, he didn't." And I'm like, "No, he really did." And somebody next door stuck their head and said, "Yeah, he really did." And Mark went, "I was in the bathroom, damn it."
That's too funny. Well, needless to say, long story short, so Mark Harrison and I, we were busy working on Sim Earth when I get called into Alan Pavlich's office, and he basically says, "Hey, so Sim Earth is canceled," and I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's gone." And I'm like, "Well, is there anything I can do?" And he's like, "No." And so all this hard work, all this time and effort, and all this excitement, destroyed, right? So I immediately was like, well, I feel like shit. And honestly, it was like, this was like the baby that I was gonna, give birth to, and I was unhappy with that. However, what really made this the gut punch was that this came on the tail end of something called Interplay's 10th anniversary. And I'll have to tell you that story.
A CD anthology.
Yes. So this was when I was still Bill Dugan's assistant producer, and I was given this great idea. It's like Interplay had been around for 10 years. Its 10th year anniversary was coming up, and they wanted to have a game on a CD-ROM for each year it's been in business. And great idea. However, some of these older games wouldn't even work on the newer, like OSs and such like that, right? And what was worse was that actually trying to find the source code was nigh impossible. So, I mean, I remember going into Troy Worrell's office, and he was the guy that was supposed to be like the guy who kept all of the old code and everything else. So I remember opening up this drawer, and there's just these loose floppy disks, and I was like, I'm looking.
That was the archive.
Yeah, and I'm like I'm looking for like task times in Tone Town, and he's like, well, it's probably in there somewhere. And I'm like some of these discs aren't even like labeled, and some of them are just like rubber band together, and I'm like ah. So I ended up going through all of these. Me and Bill Heineman, you know, we worked our butts off on that thing because he was busy working on another project, but I needed someone that could understand, you know, how to, figure out like the assembly code for like Mind Shadow and stuff like that. And he was the only guy. I literally was like paying him under the table to work in his spare time to try to figure this out. But we're going through all these floppy disks trying to get all the stuff together. One crazy side story is that the code for Wasteland, the original code for Wasteland, was absent, gone completely. And so we were like, well, we need to rebuild this because it won't work on modern systems, but we can't find it anywhere. And so luckily, Bill, because he worked on the original Wasteland, had a backup on like an old floppy drive somewhere and actually resurrected it.
Years later, they lost the Fallout source code and asked me for it, even though they had threatened to sue me for having it after I left. I didn't have it, but luckily someone else had kept it.
Wow.
So Wasteland, Fallout, several games would have been lost if people had not kept their own copies of it. So that happened a lot.
Insane. Well, anyway, as the story goes, so Bill and I were killing ourselves. So he's busy literally building these 10 different games. I am making an installer that will, you know, install them all, and I'm also creating digital manuals for each one of them. Because remember, this was before like PDFs and stuff like that. They all have to like
scan the old manuals.
Yeah, you couldn't even scan the manuals because OCR wasn't even a thing. So I literally had to type all the stuff in myself and do all the art, you know, in 320 by 200 VGA because oh my god, dude. Anyway. Deep breath. So, yeah, all the trauma's coming back. So anyway, we only had 4 months to do this thing, right? 4 months! And so we did it all. We got it done. We, you know, got it in the manual was like an inch and a half thick. It was tremendous. But we got this thing out. And so there was a company meeting a little time afterwards. And it was an all hands meeting. And you know, Brian Fargo goes up to the front of it and he starts talking about, you know, the 10-year anniversary CD-ROM. And he basically is like, yeah, this is, you know, it did really, really well. As a matter of fact, it was responsible for like 60% of the profits, you know, that quarter or whatnot. It's done really, really well. And Bill and I, we're like at the back, like corner of the room, and we're looking at ourselves going, hell yeah, dude, yeah. And Brian's like, yeah, you know, and I'd like to thank the people that made this, you know, possible. And Bill and I were just like, hell yeah, we're going to get, you know, some, you know, big gold star by our name. And then he calls Trish Wright and Kim Motika, the marketing people, to come up, and they basically took 100% of the responsibility. And then Bill and I are sitting in the back going, oh, okay, yay. Any acknowledgement at all? Nope, not a thing. So we were heartbroken. And then, not you know, that far afterwards, Sim Earth got canceled. Sim City's a whole nother story. Oh my God. The spending like $1.25 million on a title where all the other games at Interplay had like, you know, budgets of like maybe $100,000. Well, you were there at that producer summit. I remember you. Anyway, so at the end of the day, I truly believed that Interplay wasn't going to be around much more. When it was making its moves with Universal, I was, you know, after hours and stuff, you know, kind of like talking with like Dick Learberg and such like that, and he was giving me just like all of the inside dirt and, you know, just going like, you know, if he was stressed out about everything, you know, thinking that, you know, oh, I don't know if this can happen, if this could work. And so I'm just thinking to myself, damn, man, I mean, I love this company, but, you know, I don't know that it's going to be around. So all of that is on my back, right? And at the same time, you know, playing GURPS, Fallout, what would be Fallout was just starting to actually be a thing, which was the brightest moment at the time, you know, that were the brightest thing in my life at the time. It was just the thing I wanted. So taking a real quick step back, so just after 10th anniversary, Bill Heineman was working on Descent. They called him in because there was like a network bug. I don't know if you remember this or not, but there was a networking bug that like was just like a memory stomper, the worst kind of bug possible. And he was called in to possibly help fix their network code because it had something to do with the network traffic coming back and forth. And like one packet at some time would get generated that was like 1 byte too big or something like that, right? Just the crazy thing. And I remember sitting at his desk with him, and he was watching his monitor like the freaking Matrix, right? Like all of the data just spilling down. And I remember him staring at it, and he just puts his finger out and says, right there. And I'm like, what? And he's like, right there, that byte right there. And he's like, because it was being overwritten. And yeah, that was it. I mean, the dude, legendary dude. Anyway, so he was a very, very good friend of mine. And just afterwards, he was talking about like network security and stuff. And he did something stupid, but he was trying to make a point where he like got Brian Fargo's password to his email and sent him a message from himself or something like that to basically say, hey, we really need to work on security here at Interplay. And for that, he was fired and like just out the door, thrown out. And I'm like, dude, he was one of the founders of this company. He's done so much stuff. He was one of the guys that literally told me to, maybe go get a job at Interplay, and stuff like that. I mean, it's like, me and Bill, we were tight, man. And so all of that was just like dragging me down. And then, so here comes, the game that would be Fallout. I do all this design for it. The team's coming together. I'm still not entirely sure whether or not we'd actually be able to make anything when, out of the blue, Bill Heineman calls me up and says, hey, Scott, how would you like a job? And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. So it turns out I started up this company with a friend, and we have maybe a couple other people from Interplay, and we're making our own game studio called Logicware, and we need someone that is basically a game director that can create and oversee any of the games that we make. And we have this one particular game that we have potentially a buyer for. And I was just like, this is like the perfect opportunity, right? And so thinking Interplay, it's like they wonderful place, but I did feel kind of slighted a little bit, and I thought what they did with Bill was bad, and and I'm like, God, I'd love to work with this dude again, and the opportunity of having my own say and be like creative director and stuff, hooray! And so yeah, I said, all right, I'll do everything I can possibly do with Fallout, as much story and as much brain dump as I possibly can, get it all done on paper, turn it over, and then say, peace out.
I remember us talking on the balcony that you were going to leave. And I just remember being like, because from my point of view, it was like, we were all super excited. We were doing all this stuff. It was all starting to come together. We were actually seeing levels being made. We didn't have a scripting language yet, but some primitive AI was in and stuff. And then you were like, I have to go. Yeah. And I still remember afterwards, several people and we were sitting around and we were like, we're not going to be able to recover from this. You were so passionate and you did so much. I mean, you worked so much and we already had so much stuff done. And the thing that kind of saved us, because we were super depressed, is Stonekeep shipped.
Oh, Stonekeep.
95.
Yep.
And Chris Taylor, who had already worked with us, he had come unpaid and worked some nights. He was at the meetings, the pizza meetings. He was released because there was no Stonekeep. I think they going to talk about a Stonekeep too, and it never happened. So yeah, we got him, and it was like, okay, we can do this. But I just remember, and Leonard said years later when Leonard and I were counting, what are all the times we thought we were screwed? And we talked about the almost cancellations. That's the first time I told him, yeah, you don't know this, but I almost quit because I couldn't afford a mortgage. And the mortgage guy was literally laughing at me about what I was paid. And he was like, look, dude, I worked with computer programmers at a bunch of different companies. You were the absolute lowest paid one I've ever seen by like orders of magnitude. And he was just like, you cannot get a loan. There's no strings I can pull. There's nothing I can lie to any bank at any interest rate. This is not going to happen. And I remember thinking, wait a minute, I'm getting screwed here. But we were talking about that, and he didn't know about that one. And he said, yeah, but man, when Scott Campbell left,
Mm.
because we were like, who's gonna think of all the ideas of the who's like? There were some things about the Junktown and the hub that were just so Fallouty. They were like, you go to Junktown, you're like, I get it. Some people were scared. There were mutant animals eating them. They went into a junkyard and there were stacks of cars, and that thing still worked. So they moved some cars, and then suddenly things aren't eating them every day. Simple, but
Yep.
it was such a cool thing. And also, I remember Leonard goes, "Oh, we can make that really fast," because it was back then the stuff it was hard to do organic, and it was hard to do
Anything with fur, that's for sure.
fur, dirt. I remember Jason complaining how hard dirt was to do. I'm like, well, you better get used to it. This game's got a lot of dirt.
Yeah,
But the cars weren't that hard. So putting the car models and stacking them up and not having to worry about doing the interiors, they like that. So I just remember that was a rough day. So.
Well, I mean, so I have talked to many people since, and they're like, oh, so what'd you do on Fallout? And I told them a little bit, and they're like, oh, so when it shipped, and I'm like, well, I don't have a lot of insight into all the things that went into that because I had left. And they're like, oh, really? I'm like, yeah. Honestly, looking back, at everything, I tell people, finish what you start, right? It's like, I think leaving Fallout, not just when I did, but just leaving a project in the middle of development, just don't do it, right? It's like, I've only done it one time in my entire professional career. That was Fallout, and the only project I regret is Fallout, because that out of all the things I've worked on, and I've worked on some things I'm really super proud of, but Fallout is the one that's like, God damn it, I wish I would have seen that all the way through.
Here's what I should tell you though, because I left Fallout too. I always tell people not to regret anything, because I always go like, okay, if I hadn't left Fallout 2, I never would have made my own company. I never would have made Arcanum and some of those other projects. So I don't want to ever say I regret anything, but Fallout is one of 2 projects I ever walked away from in my career, and neither felt good. Didn't feel good. However, in hindsight, it was the right thing to do. No matter how people felt, no matter what people said. And so I always think that, even though I think it would have been awesome, and I hope I haven't stressed that too much for you to have stayed, I was never really angry because I've heard you became a game director, and I'm like, well, that's awesome. I mean, that's how could you ever go, hey, screw you. You should have stayed and been a designer on this, been the lead designer on it. I mean, that was a huge step up of what you did. And I'm happy you did it, and tons of things worked out, and you had a great career. And I wanted to balance that with, we were all sad you left. We really were sad that you weren't there. And that's why years later, I mean, you left in late 95, so late 97, we're doing the final parts of the game, and the manual has to be done. And I don't remember, I want to say it was Leonard, but somebody went, hey, a lot of people worked on this game, but remember the original genesis of this game? I want those names all on a credit line. And I'm really glad your name is there, and I'm really glad we did this, because I don't think people know enough about what you did. A lot of Fallout bits are only there because of Scott Campbell.
Well, I mean, I saw your video on credits, and I think that is so perfectly put, right? It's like, even though you might have the inception of like an idea or something like that, that kind of means nothing, especially like when you look at like a final product, because it's a collaborative effort, right? It's like everyone crafts it and pushes it and molds it into the final product, right? I mean, as you said in that video, that even though it sounds as though you might be speaking very politically correct when you're like, well, we did this, and but that's the truth, man. I mean, it's like, I can't take credit for any of this stuff, because especially Fallout, when you have people that in essence, are all game players. We're all, have in our minds like what kind of game we want to make. We all understand the principles of design and art, and most of us engineering. It's like we were all just like, we were game developers.
Yeah.
And it's like, even though some of us had some cool ideas, everyone riffed off of those ideas and it became something greater than its inception. So I usually just say, hey, I helped out with like the original story part of Fallout, right? And that's usually where I keep it.
Here's what I like to tell people: there's 2 periods in a game that require tons of heavy lifting and passion and commitment. The beginning, where there's nothing and everything. I mean, you're like, what's the story? What's the setting? What's the art style going to be? We have no tools. We can't make anything. We don't even know the rough outline of what we want to make. And then the ending, where you actually get this thing across the finish line, against all odds and bugs and people yelling at you and marketing people going, I promised it on the shelves. Well, I shouldn't have done that, but okay. Your problem has now become my problem. Those are the 2 worst parts. And so I felt like, you were there with us at the very beginning, and you got us pushed past some of those hard conceptual points. And I just want people, if there's one thing they walk away from this, wow, we've been talking for over an hour. If they walk away with one thing, it's, wow, Scott Campbell had a lot to do with Fallout.
Oh, well.
That's what I want them walking away with, because you did.
Well,
I think I found a picture of you.
I have honestly, I've worked on a lot of games. I've touched a great many titles in the 30 some odd years that I've been around, and helped some from the inception point, helped some of them just like with like some systems, and others I've done most of the design heavy lifting. And some big projects, some small projects, lots of console games. I literally regret nothing. I think that the time I spent at Logicware helped me become a much better designer. And all this time, when founding, White Moon Dreams, my God, 16 years ago.
That's amazing.
I know, and we're, like I said, we're still an independent studio, so it's just we're the ones that own the place, and we're still doing good. We're helping a lot of other companies out right now, not just ship their games, but be AAA titles, and run at like high frame rate, and helping some companies out with some design, also helping a couple of skunkwork things that I can't really even talk about. It's
it's just between us.
No, it's just between, exactly. Well, let me tell you. No, NDAs are one of those strong binding things that everyone should be afraid of. But yeah, man, it's Fallout is again one of those things that like I tell people like I worked on this game, I worked on that game. It's like some of the games that we had worked on at White Moon, it's like, oh, Starblood Arena. And a lot of times it's like, what's that? It's like, well, it was a PlayStation VR launch title. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay. Or I'm like, oh, yeah, War Machine Tactics, the War Machine tabletop game, we did that. And, like, oh, okay. It's like, all right, well, how about Myth 3, The Wolf Age? I really did a whole lot of work on that. And, they're like, oh, Myth, yeah, that was that Bungie game. Yeah, well, yeah, okay, I played 1 and 2. Where like, oh yeah, I actually worked a little bit on like God of War, a little bit on like Shadow of the Colossus, a little bit on like, Killzone, a little bit on like a whole bunch of other these tiny games when I was at Sony. I made this game called, God, I hate this name, but Neopets, The Darkest Fairy, which was Sony's attempt to make a Legend of Zelda game in the Neopets universe. I did that entire design, yeah, me and George Weissing, my God, we spent so much time on that. Looking back on like all the little things, Fallout is still the one that like I mentioned that and everyone's like, oh, you did that, and I'm like, yeah.
And I think we should thank Bethesda for resurrecting that license and getting it mainstream. But yes, I know what you mean. Because you sometimes want to go, I did other things too. Exactly. But everyone was like, tell us Fallout stories.
Yep.
I just want to make sure you understand that, like, I'm thanking you not from just me and from the Fallout team, but for the fans. I mean,
Oh,
thank you very much. I mean, Fallout was special, and I don't mean
the system.
the attributes. I
Yep.
mean, it was a special time. It was a special game, and we all know how much we owe you. But now I hope other people know how much they should consider you when they look at Fallout and go, "I like this game."
Well, I mean, again, totally appreciate all of the words, but I'm also the guy that came up with the name Rad Scorpion. Yeah.
Hey, it was better than I was the one who wanted to name the game Rad Storm. Out of that, because of that dumb movie. Oh God, now I forget it because it was the destruction of Jared Sin. It was the worst movie ever.
Oh my God, that was oh my God, Maelstrom? No, what was
Metal Storm. The destruction of Jared Sin. Do you know what's wrong with that? Jared Sin isn't destroyed. He escapes at the end.
At the end, yes.
And there's no Metal Storms. That movie had made me so angry at the end.
It was so good. It needed to be a sequel.
Let's just agree that some of our contributions weren't perhaps the highest points of the game, but it wouldn't have been Fallout with all the stuff you did without that. It's just, it was a really cool game. I hope people know Scott Campbell contributed to a lot of cool parts of that cool game.
Well, it was a lot of fun, and it's like I came to the conclusion a while ago. Someone asked me, what would you do when you retire? And I thought to myself, well, what I would probably do is I'd probably get a whole bunch of like really cool people that are like really passionate about games together, and I'd probably make video games with them. And then I stopped and I thought, and I looked around at my company, and I was like, that's exactly what I did 16 years ago. I guess I'm retired now, huh? So, I mean, I don't ever plan on quitting. And honestly, we have, some, very large AAA projects that we're trying to get off the ground now. So, it's the future is still there. Will it be another Fallout? Well, I don't know that that'll ever be repeated, but it's always something to look forward to, right? The good times, and all the possibility of making something that speaks to people.
I agree. And I wish you the best of luck, and I want to thank you for doing this. And this was one of the coolest chats I've done.
Man, Tim, seriously, it has been way too long. Yeah, we should do this again. Yeah. Seriously.
Definitely. But thank you.
Yes. Well, again, thank everyone out there. I appreciate it. Again, hope to, I guess, talk soon.